All right, my name's Will Burrington from the Southern California Mediation Association. We're gonna let some folks kind of join in here, so just bear with us for a few minutes. Welcome to our day 4 of our Mediation Awareness Week, which we're doing here in Southern California through the Southern California Mediation Association. I happen to be a member. I happen to be on the outreach committee. There's other members here as well. Our job this week was just to let folks that are out in the community know more about what is mediation. What is conflict resolution? What is it all about? And so we've had a series of these this week. Today, Thursday, we're going to be focusing on law enforcement and the role between law enforcement and the community in terms of conflict resolution, mediation, things like that. We have 89 people registered. I'm not going to sit here and wait till 89 people are on the participant list, but we'll give it just about a minute more, and then we're going to go around and we will introduce people. And we have a couple other people, one other, I think, who's going to be joining us as a panelist. So hopefully she'll be on shortly. Just by way of a quick background, my name's Will Burrington. I am originally from Wisconsin, moved here from Washington, D.C. in 2017. And I started out as a litigator, lawyer type, and then a policy advocate in Washington, D.C. and in Europe for an internet company, and then did executive coaching for many years. And then after COVID, because of what happened with the law enforcement situation and just the overall level of conflict in this country in every direction, right? Fear, fanning the flames of fear. I decided to go back to school at age 62 to get my Master of Laws degree in dispute resolution at the Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution at Pepperdine, top program in the world consistently for 14 years, up there with Harvard and Ohio State are the other two in this country. And I also went to the Santa Monica Police Department's Citizen Police Academy, which is a 50-hour program, because I felt, I grew up respecting law enforcement. That was the way I was brought up in suburban Milwaukee. I maybe didn't always agree with things they did or didn't do, but that's true of everything. But I grew up respecting law enforcement, and especially first responders. And we know we went through a very difficult period in this country from 2020 onward. And so I just decided that I would do two things: get on the side of being a lawyer as peacemaker, being a peacemaker, being on the side of helping resolve a conflict rather than either creating it or perpetuating it. And second, I thought I might as well just go and sit with a police department for 50 hours and understand what they do and talk to them and have questions and answer questions and things of that nature. We also have Officer Rosas is on right now too, Bouvier, just so you know. All right, the other person's on. So that's what drew me into this. So that's what I'm doing. It's sort of, they call it the encore career. I'm doing what can I do for the rest of my life that's positive on the right side of the energetic frequency of either love versus fear, conflict resolution versus conflict creation, or worst of all, hanging on to things and not letting them go. So that's what this is about today. We're going to talk, for those of you who are on who don't understand what mediation is, we're going to kind of describe it to you, what it is. How does that work in the law enforcement context, both with the community, within law enforcement itself, among different agencies? So we have wonderful people on today. I want to introduce them briefly. I'm going to have you go around quickly. Shafan Roberts is in a newer expanded role as head of global strategy. He's also an adjunct professor and in the senior leadership of the Strauss Institute of Dispute Resolution at Caruso School of Law at Pepperdine University in Malibu. And Shafan, why don't you just give us a quick overview of your background? We'll go around and give everybody a quick introduction here. So go ahead, Shafan.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, so before Pepperdine, I was the director of the dispute resolution program at the city attorney's office, where we did a lot of this work that we're describing today. And interesting, Will, I'm listening to your background, and mine is a bit different in terms of how I came to this work and came to this field. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, California native, LA native, and my experience with law enforcement was a lot different, in that community. And so, I just had some run-ins, had some, interactions that were pretty tense. And so what I saw what was going on, and I see what was happening with the community. My dad lived through the Watts riots. I saw the Rodney King thing. And so I had a really interesting perspective coming into mediation with the idea of maybe this could work. At first, I was really not, optimistic, until I saw some cases right in front of my eyes happen and just transform these relationships. And I thought, well, this is actually quite powerful. But just in general, my background, I had kind of two lives as well. The first one was entertainment. I was in the business of managing talent and doing all that. I never saw myself necessarily as a peacekeeper. I was really more of a business manager and like a deal maker. But then when I got into this world, I realized, wow, this is really, it was like a calling almost for me, because I wanted to do something. When I saw the Rodney King thing happen, I wanted to do something for my community that would change the outcome. Like, what are we doing? Like, we can do better, right? And so I felt like this mediation thing was a tool, and not just a tool. Obviously, we're talking about law enforcement today, but it's not necessarily just a tool for that. It's a tool for so many things. And I know we talk about mediation being, across the table from each other, but you can use those same skill sets to create dialogues and create understanding among groups of people with throughout the community. And I believe it's just a powerful tool that we wield as mediators and peacekeepers. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to chime in and share more. But
Jonathan, we appreciate you too. I know you have family and visited, just came in yesterday, and so taking time out, we really appreciate it. I've come to get to know you a bit, and I'm getting to know you better. I call you Professor Roberts, and you have lots of different hats you wear, because I'm a student at Strauss, so I call people professor when they're professors, but learning a lot from you. And where I really learned a lot from you was a couple of years ago when the SCMA did a panel on what had happened in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles City Council and that unfortunate situation which occurred, which really opened up, there was conflict there, but with conflict opens up an opportunity for dialogue and for healing. That's another important thing. But you ran a panel where we all sat down, a group of mediators, small groups, and actually had a conversation about how that horrible incident impacted us. Nobody had done that yet for me. And I get emotional about it a little bit still, because it just opened up a chance to just talk. And we come from all different backgrounds. There are all kinds of people there from different backgrounds. And it was just such a great experience. I'll never forget it. Cheryl Epps. Now, you know a little bit about Shuffin. You guys work together. It's funny. I've heard of you. I finally met you. And the funny part is we were working together on this. So he said, you should talk to Cheryl, blah, blah, blah. And we realized as we were talking that we're in the same class together at Strauss, but you happen to be in Switzerland on the first day of the class. So we're in Psychology of Conflict Communications, taught by Professor Stephanie Blondell. It's an incredible opportunity to work together in that class with a great professor, great class. Cheryl, tell us about your background.
Thank you, Will, and good afternoon, everyone. I am my name is Cheryl Epps, and my background, talk about my second act was coming from child welfare, where I worked for 27 years before retiring. So that's where I started. I'm also one of the mediators at the LA City Attorney's Dispute Resolution Program, where I conduct mediations between police officers and community members whenever a complaint is filed, and that's if it's a deemed suitable complaint. We can certainly circle back around to that later. I am the executive director of Kids Managing Conflict, where we offer grant funds and peer mediation training to elementary, middle school, and high school students. So we mediate anything from you took my seat at recess if you're in the fourth grade, to high school where two girls are fighting over the same guy. So we teach them to have these conflict resolution skills that they will be able to take into their adulthood and beyond, to use on their sports teams and everywhere else, in their social circles. And one of the other things that I do, I work with the Institute of Nonviolence, where we have community dialogues on anything from gun violence to racism and bigotry. We did some on the George Floyd killing. So I'm very involved in what's happening within my community. Lastly, I work with Mediators Beyond Borders International, where we had a police community relations work group. We have trained mediators in Ukraine on how to engage refugees there. And so I have a pretty wide background, but my passion is for my own community. So that's one of the reasons why I choose this work, and one of the reasons why I'll be finishing up at Pepperdine, like yourself, with my master's in dispute resolution. So honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
And Cheryl, thanks for taking your time. And I look forward to learning from you and with you as we're still at Strauss and afterwards. We're both encore career people here. Rhiannon Telly, Sergeant Telly, I sat with you at a table at Pepperdine when Pepperdine, the Strauss Institute has a big grant to help train Los Angeles police officers at all levels in de-escalation techniques and other conflict mediation techniques, Chafan. Dr. Singh, the director of our program, has been running that. I happened to sit in on one of those trainings. We were at a table, Rhiannon, and we did some mock mediation together and just had such great energy. And I was just so like, wow, this is the Los Angeles Police, the face of the Los Angeles Police Department, and sort of an energy around it. You've been with the department 22 years. I know you said here that you were watching the Los Angeles riots on television in 1992 and said, I want to do something. I want to be part of the change. So you've now been with LAPD for 22 years. Fantastic energy. Do you want to share a little bit about what you're up to now, what you were doing before that?
Thank you. Yeah, so like Chaffin, I watched the riots, and like Chaffin, it inspired me to want to be a part of Los Angeles and want to be a part of the change. And so I joined Los Angeles Police Department because when I watched the riots, I wanted to stop the violence and stop the chaos. And how can I be a part of that? And I wanted to be there, and I wanted to make people feel safe. And I don't know how old I was at the time then, maybe 12 or 13 or something, but that was what was in my heart as a 12 or 13-year-old watching that. So, and that's what I've carried into my job. So, yeah, so in 2015, Chaffin and I became partners. And with our different backgrounds, me from Montana, him from South Central Los Angeles, and us from our different perspectives, but what we had in common was our hearts, and his heart for community, my heart for the community. And with our different perspectives, we came together and with the same goal in mind. And even though that road was sometimes rocky, we realized that we had more in common than we didn't. And now he's like a brother to me, and he's like family to me. And that's just what's awesome. And that's what's awesome about mediation, is that, people that sometimes seems like they have so little in common, they actually have way more in common than they ever thought they actually did. And it's just about seeing that perspective and taking that time. And that's honestly what the amazing thing is about these mediation sessions that we have between police and community members, is that we really have more in common with each other. And most of the officers that are part of Los Angeles Police Department are officers that grew up in this community, and they became police officers because they want to be part of the change in the community, and they want to bring peace and unity to the community. So hearing how to do that from the community members' perspective, and in these mediation sessions is really helpful. And so I was the coordinator for the mediation program for LAPD from 2015 to 2022. And I now work at recruitment and employment division. So now I help hire the police officers that are part of Los Angeles Police Department. So now I can take all of my experience and apply it to what I do now. So yeah, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Rhiannon, thank you. And we're lucky to have you here today, but just generally given your background, your wisdom. And I know the department is trying to hire more officers and is under pressure to do that and has a new chief. And so what a great place to be right now for you, and actually for all of us that are served and protected by the Los Angeles Police Department. Next is Jonathan Tom, Commander Jonathan Tom. I met you for the first time last Friday in this, right after the class that Cheryl and I are in, because you're in a restorative justice class at Pepperdine, getting your master's in dispute resolution. I have your lengthy bio here and just incredible things. John, do you want to just give us some background? You're on duty today. Appreciate being here. Yep. I know you got to jump off at 11 or at 12:45. Go ahead.
Happy to be here. Honored to be a participant on this panel. My story is a little bit of a long one, but I'll try to shrink it down for you. I grew up in the city of Los Angeles. My family has lived here for 150 years. So I like to think our family is part and parcel of all the tragedy and successes of this city. My own story is that my family has been the victim of burglaries. My mother's been mugged in front of our house, beaten up pretty badly. I've been robbed. We've had cars stolen. So literally, like, everything that our community has suffered through, both good and bad experiences with the police, have happened to our family. So it really has led me to have a different understanding than many of my colleagues, and in law enforcement, just having that kind of background. And I think it was, I don't know if she's a sergeant or not, but she had mentioned that many of us are from this community, and it does make a difference when we're from this community. So I went to USC. I went to Whittier Law School for a year, and I was a law clerk for the city of LA City Attorney's Office, and I hated it. Couldn't picture being a lawyer. And I talked to my boss, who was a city attorney, And she said, you know what, go talk to my husband. He loves his job. Turns out he was an LAPD sergeant. And the thing that struck me was he said, you know, the thing about being a cop is that you'll never be rich, but you'll never be poor. And you have a real chance of making a difference every day that you're working. And that really resonated with me. And so for the last 28 years, I've been a police officer. I've worked all over the city. I've worked obviously patrol, administrative assignments, and undercover assignments. And currently, I am a commander, which is a rank. You know, essentially, we have police officers, detectives, sergeant, lieutenant, captains, commanders, deputy chiefs, assistant chief, and chief of police. So, as a commander, I'm an assistant commanding officer of Operations West Bureau. So we serve everyone on the west side. We have 5 divisions: Hollywood, West LA, Wilshire, Pacific, and Olympic divisions. It's 121 square miles. We have about 930,000 residents and about 1,300 officers that work in that area. So it's a pretty large area, and a lot of like what I've done in my career has to do with my background in the city, my experience level as a command officer. I was a command officer for over 6.5 years. And we're mediating all the time. This is the job of a police officer. We go out to different kinds of radio calls, and we're trying to talk to people. And that's a really big part of what we do as police officers, is trying to talk to people. And prior to being on the job, I was a salesman. And so I always say this job, like every other job, it's really a salesmanship job. Whether you're talking to someone and trying to sell them into not beating up their wife, or sell them into what we, you know, handcuffs, as we say, or to sell them on the idea that you need to turn your radio down so that your neighbors can sleep. It's always about communication and talking. And the more that we can try to be empathetic with each other and listen and really utilize that active listening, the better off we are as police officers, and the better the community is served. So ultimately, that's really what has led me to where I'm at in terms of the job. And also, you know, I'm a candidate for a master's in dispute resolution at Strauss, as you had indicated. And I'm actually finding it very interesting, and it applies directly to the job that I'm doing.
All right. Thank you, John. We appreciate you. We know you got to leave a little early, so feel free to do that. But what we're going to do is we have another person. We have a larger panel. She's been having some difficulty getting on, but Sochi Rosas is going to be on in a minute. And she is with Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. She's been in law enforcement for 40 years, drives every day from Claremont and does a 10-hour shift and goes back. And started in Santa Monica as a police cadet. And she'll be jumping on at some point here. Here's what we're going to do for everybody's benefit. It is now 12:20. We're going to go for about 15, 20 minutes, just kind of do a little roundtable here. Those of you that have questions, keep them, think about them, write them down. You can go into the Q&A function here on Zoom. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. You can put those questions in. We are really here for you today to get questions and not to talk about us, but we do have a really distinguished, diverse panel. And so one thing I want to say, because in theory today, Mediation Week is for people who don't really understand what mediation is, for everyday citizens out there. And first of all, what I want to say is everybody can be trained to be mediator, okay? You don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to be 62. We need more conflict resolvers, not less. We're living in a very interesting time. I mentioned earlier, for those who maybe weren't on earlier, I said I'm doing a 4-day Tony Robbins a Zoom with my partner here. It's 4 days from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm dipping in and out of it, but with 60,000 people around the world. And what he talked about this morning was, believe it or not, we are in a period of the least amount of conflict in our history. It doesn't feel like that. His point was simply this: there's a lot going on around us, and it's easy to get sucked into stuff and think it's all bad and we're all in this winter season. It's just all going down. And there are a lot of things going on, no question about it. Or we can look at it as it's an exciting time here. We have a good mayor in Los Angeles. We have a new police chief. We have the Olympics coming. We have the World Cup coming. We got major things happening around here. Great things happening within our city and the Los Angeles County, the most diverse county in the United States of America. So it's a great laboratory to try things. And for me, it's much more fun to be on the side of conflict resolution, resolving conflict. And what I learned during COVID, because I started a weekly Zoom here in Santa Monica with the police department, with the health department, with first responders, with community people, our mayor, our city council. It goes every Wednesday at noon, and it's still going on. We still have people that get on every Wednesday because they felt safe and comfortable. All I did during that period is people needed to be heard. They just wanted to be heard. it helps a lot to be heard. And so what we want to do today is if you have questions with these officers or anybody around these programs at city attorney's office, what have you, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them. We're going to end up here at about 5:02. I'm going to do something a little strange. I hope you don't mind, but it's lunch hour. We're going to do 2 minutes of silence. I'm going to time 2 minutes of silence. And we're just going to do a mini 2 minutes silence here so people can experience what it feels like to experience peace together as a group, because we can do that and we need to do that. All right, let's go on. Cheryl, do you want to tee up some questions here for us? Because I know you have some, or get this thing rolling because you're really good at that. Do you mind?
Sure, no problem. Well, I think one of the first things the attendees may want to know is how the process works. How can we
Yeah.
start
Perfect.
mediation between police and community members? So, as Shafin, Rhiannon, and I are all familiar, we've all worked on the same program. It really is a collaborative process, and it's a process where we receive our referrals from LAPD, and then the cases that are suitable. And we're not talking about cases of excessive force. We're not talking about anything that raises to the level of criminal activity by an officer or any of those allegations. We receive cases for disrespect. Why did you pull me over? For bias, for racial profiling, for all of those types of things that aggravate, our community members from day to day. And so when we receive those cases, they're assigned to a mediator like myself. And then we would reach out to the community member. Meanwhile, our liaison reaches out to the officers to see if they're open to coming to this process. And it's a voluntary process. So these officers are not threatened with having a negative mark on their jacket. They're literally said, this is a process for you to come and hear from your community. So they volunteer to come. To my knowledge, they're not voluntold. So we're happy to get them when they're here because they get a chance to hear the heart of the community member who experienced them that one time, that one day. And so we sit with both parties. They have a guided conversation with a mediator like myself, and we just go over what happened, how everything went down. What we find is that sometimes the officers will come in saying, I want to tell that community member they need to, give their ID when I ask for it, or they need to comply with what we're asking. And the community member will say, I want to tell that officer that I didn't like the way he talked to me, or I didn't like the things that he said, or he didn't have to treat me that way. But by the time it's all said and done, and they've each had a chance to hear each other's heart, there have been mutual apologies going on both sides. You'll have an officer who's saying, I hear what you're saying from now on. I'll be mindful of my tone. Or the community member saying, my apologies from now on. I'll try not to curse you out. I'll be kinder if I ever get pulled over again. So it's a transformative process, but it's very, very effective. We've done it with people of communities of color. We've done it with every type of officer from every race and nationality and everything in between. And so I'll stop there because my fellow panelists may want to chime in, but that's kind of how the process works.
So this is when a person, thank you, Cheryl. So when a citizen of the city of Los Angeles has some kind of complaint, right, with LAPD or something like that, they can initiate that process through the city attorney's office, right? And the LA City Attorney's Office has a robust mediation program beyond law enforcement in all kinds of areas. We're really lucky. It's award-winning, nationally recognized. I don't know if people realize that, but it's really impressive. Shafin, do you want to add any any of you can jump in here.
I do, and Rhiannon for sure. So actually, so what happens is, and this is important because we've had people contact the city attorney's office directly, and it doesn't go that way. It comes through internal IA actually, and they then vet it, and there's a whole process, and they send over the cases to the city attorney's office, and then from there we kind of do what we do. I want to say, Cheryl, that's a great description of what happens, but it's important because I think also as folks are listening to this, you may be thinking, okay, like how can we get involved? So when a program is already established, then this is great. You can sign up to the city attorney's office, become a mediator, and get involved. Some other people may be saying, well, how can I bring this to my city, state, town, et cetera, what have you? Right? How do I do it in my area? Mm-hmm. Well, it's very important to kind of step back a second and just think about how we set this thing up to begin with. And it was through really years. I mean, even before I came to the city, which was it's the early 2000s, they were already working on this program. It was like kind of a long road, but ultimately there was a lot of work done with the Police Protective League. You know, you cannot do this without partnering with the community, with law enforcement. And the other side of that was also partnering with the community, making sure that the various stakeholders were consulted in terms of what this was looking like, you know, how this would work. And eventually they got to a place where it was acceptable. And it was like, okay, we can do this. And even then, I actually, even with the Police Protective League saying yes, we had problems with officers buying into it in the beginning. And so, you know, it's really like, how do you put the support systems around? How do you get the buy-in so that you can have a program that's actually going to be successful? Because even if you set it up, the framework's there, if people don't use it, then that's a problem, right? We have problems also with the community. If they have no faith in that process, they won't show up. And so then you have something. So it's really about getting buy-in from all parties and moving, kind of getting to have that initial structure in place that's going to actually get the car rolling forward. So I want to just name that because it was really critical to stand in standing it up. Yeah.
My understanding, Shafin, is you basically built this program from scratch.
I want to be careful. No, I want to be careful. I was there in the beginning. I want to be. Yeah, I'll be very mindful. There was many people that the credit would need to go to. I just happened to be the person that they tapped on the, you know, said, hey, can you help get this thing happening? Help run the pilot program. And then, you know, with actually Marlon, who was LAPD at the time, was kind of my counterpart. And then Rhiannon, he was very, very brief. And Rhiannon stepped on board, and we kind of really went from there and started to learn from a lot of the mistakes that we were having, and changing and adjusting and helping to scale it to where it is now. So
Rhiannon, go ahead and fire in here, and then I want to jump in.
I was just going to say, I think that, you know, what Shafin was saying about making people feel that it's safe and getting the buy-in, because that was the challenge in the beginning, was making our employees feel that it was safe. And we say officers, but this program is open to any department employee. So we have about 3,000 civilian employees that interact with the community as well. And so it's open to our civilian employees too, like our 911 operators, we call them PSRs, or our clerks, you know, that interact with the community as well. So we have, and our reserve employees and volunteers and things. So so we had to make our employees feel safe. So we needed to get the unions that represent the employees, we had to get their buy-in, and then we needed them to promote the program. And then we needed the community members to feel that it was safe. And I think at first, what is the name of the program? Somebody said, okay, so initially we called it the Bias Policing Complaint Mediation Program, because that was what we were mediating, was bias policing complaints.
Is there an acronym in there? I'm just kidding.
Well, Shafin came to me one day and he goes, look, Rhiannon, look, we need something more aspirational. And, you know, cops are not big on touchy-feely. I'm just going to be real here. And, you know, especially like in the beginning, I got to say, I wasn't as touchy-feely as I am now. And Shafin came to me and he's like, Rhiannon, we need something more aspirational. I don't like calling it bias policing anything. And I said, well, that's what we do. Like, cops are just, we name something what it is. That's what it is. And he's like, no, we're going to call it, how about Police Community Unification Program? And you know, LAPD is big on acronyms. We turn everything into an acronym. I mean, look at our name, LAPD. And I said, no, Shafin, that's going to end up being PCUP. No, we can't be the PCUP program. And he goes, okay, well, let's do Community Police Unification Program. So we could be the
CPUP.
So that we call it Community Police Unification Program. I said, okay, you call it that where you're from, but where I'm from, we're still going to call it the Bias Policing Mediation Program. But that's neither here nor there. This is a funny story to make sure everybody's still awake, but that's what we call it. But what we learned is that the community buy-in was the harder part. And that was actually the harder part for us to promote. And I think we still, when we talk about our challenges, that's still where our challenges lie, because we ended up getting pretty much 100% of our employees will say yes to mediation at this point. Pretty much 100% say yes, 100% love it. The difficult part is getting the community buy-in. And there's multiple reasons, because we've dissected that a million times over. Why, and that we don't need to go into that now, but I think one of the things that Shafin and I discovered, initially it was our department contacting the community members and offering the mediation option to resolve the complaint that they had generated. But what we found is we got more buy-in when the city attorney's office and the mediators contacted. Shoffin and I talked about that, and we agreed that we would try that. So Shoffin came up with a contact system, and that's what we did. We ended up, when we first tried it the first couple months and it stayed consistent, we got 60% more community participation as a result of that one tiny little switch. Anyway, I just want to say that that's a huge part. So I would encourage anybody that's on here that are mediators, that if you're in a community where you see that this is something, how do you keep them confidential? You sign, there's forms. We have confidentiality forms. And also, if you're in California, I don't know how many of these people are in California, but California has very, very strict ADR rules, alternative dispute rules. So, and probably attorneys on here are better to speak to that, but but there's very strict rules on ADR, and there's confidentiality waiver forms that you have, that they fill out in the beginning. And so that's how you keep it confidential. But just to finish my thought, and then somebody else can step in, we want to encourage you to establish these programs in your neighborhoods, in your communities, with your law enforcement agencies. That was one thing that I promoted and would go out and speak to other agencies. I went to the International Associations with Shoffin, International Association of Chief of Police Conference. I went to and spoke to chief of police from all over the world. And we would go out and tout this program all over and talk about it. And we have had other cities pick up this program and take this program and start this program.
Great. No, that's great. And that's the ultimate compliment, right?
That's the thing. Okay, I'll stop. But yeah, that's it.
Great. No, but Rhiannon, thank you. It's really helpful to have the three of you here. And this is a piece of this equation we're talking about today, which is that there is the opportunity going within police department to mediate things, right? John, and again, thanks for being on today while you're out and about. I mean, what would you like to add to this discussion as far as where you see mediation happening with law enforcement out in the community, kind of maybe in the other direction, right? There's that other direction going outward.
Yeah, I think that, like one of the things, I'm sorry, I'm backing up.
Okay. Whatever
and I'm parked, so I can not drive distracted. So one of the things that I tell my own subordinates is that whether it's the community or our own cops, people are people, and they want three things, in my opinion. They want to feel like they have a voice, and it goes to what you said, so consistent with the concepts of procedural justice. People feel generally a lack of a voice. They don't feel like they can say how they feel. So number one, you want to give people a voice. And number two, they want to feel that you care about that you're listening, and that you care about what they're saying. And number three, that you're going to do your best to try to address those issues, whatever those issues are. And what I've found is that if you do those three things, people can accept even the outcome that they weren't hoping for, right? All they really want, they want to feel like they have a voice, you're listening and you care, and you're just going to do your best to try to address those concerns. So I think the mediation program, whether it's the alternative dispute resolution program or the biased policing mediation program, or whatever mediation we're involved in, if you have those three things, I think you're going to have a successful outcome in terms of just listening to each other. Because the main thing that I feel and I tell people about is that police are people. We're human beings. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm an uncle, I'm all the same things that everyone else is in society, but there's bias against police officers too. Sure. Because we wear this uniform, we become just the blue, and people forget that we're human beings. By the same token, our own police officers have to look at community members and realize that they are people, and they have their own biases, their own things that are going on. Even if someone is committing a crime, they have things that led them to that point. And we shouldn't be dehumanizing them. And I think that the mediation process for both sides, and that's the ideal of a mediation, is that both sides are open to the dialogue and listening and empathetic and sympathetic and all those things. And I think that the mediation process allows it, because otherwise, if we didn't have that, the way I view things, then we're in an adversarial situation, right? So the adversarial systems, like criminal justice system, even our own complaint system, is adversarial at its nature. it basically requires people to protect their rights to not talk to each other. And that's it's a complete opposite of mediation. And that's something that I've been kind of pushing on my own.
Okay, John, there we go. You're good. Listen, thanks, John. Let me add in a couple things here. And we are watching the Q&A as well. So that, let me just say a couple things. One is that for those who are not mediators or wondering about mediation, which was the purpose of this whole week in the first place, mediation only happens when parties are willing to resolve their dispute. They have to voluntarily want to do that. Mediators don't solve the problem. We're not judges. All right. We're not arbitrators either who can make decisions. We create a safe space, a place of trust and hopefully openness where parties who are willing to work on their dispute or their conflict can do that. And then we are trained to help make that happen, to facilitate that. That's what mediators do. But there has to be willingness there in the first place. The second thing I just want to point out, and I think we all know what's been going on since 2020 and with COVID and just everything we've been through. It's just unbelievable what we as a population, not just here but around the world, have been through. We're incredibly resilient people, unbelievably resilient when we come together. And so I think what I'm noticing too is people really do want that time. They want to be heard. People have a lot going on. We're all juggling so much all the time now with our devices, with distractions, just trying to make sense of everything going on, from climate change to wars to conflict, our own lives, financial issues. You can go down the list. It's overwhelming. It is absolutely overwhelming. And I'm just, I operate from the standpoint that everyone's dealing with stuff. And I'm trying to be curious about that with compassion rather than judgment, and give people space, whether it's in the grocery store line or when I'm driving or anywhere, because people need a little extra space and a little extra time today. At least I do, to process and make a decision or do whatever. It's really helpful, calms things down. Cheryl, go ahead, and we'll continue on. I'm going to get to some of the questions then in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, really quick to your point, Will, you were talking about that it's a voluntary process, and having that element of self-determination really helps for both parties to come together and really get to the heart of what that issue is. It's no secret that LAPD and other policing agencies have had a long-standing history of inappropriate behavior or questionable behavior, and so we recognize that LAPD is constantly trying to combat against that and build the trust again with the community. And so this is one of the ways that we can do that. To Rhiannon's point about the community not necessarily trusting the process or wanting to participate, that's 100% true. We as mediators have to go that extra step to explain to the community member why it may be to their benefit to just consider participating in this process. And that could be, once you get that citation, you may never see that officer again. So what if you had an opportunity just to sit with them and share with them how you engaged each other that day? You find out many things. And in some cases, we've had officers who were operating by the book, shining the flashlight a certain way in a person's face, and they got offended and they filed a complaint. Well, it wasn't until they got together that officer realized that this could be very offensive to someone if they've done nothing wrong. But the thing that connected them was that both of them had just recently lost the same parent. And so when that officer heard that community member was just trying to work off some angst, when he was being followed, that officer said, you know what, now that I've heard from you, I'm not going to do that in the face anymore, because I see how that can come across. Even though that's part of their training, they recognize little differences that they can make so that they can operate better with the community. So yes, it's very difficult to talk to a community member and let them know, one, we're not an extended arm of LAPD, and number two, we want to help give them a voice and share that space with an officer that may not be considered safe, but it's safe enough, because it does get a little uncomfortable sometimes, but they have the opportunity to teach and to learn. And as does that officer, they have the opportunity to explain some of those policies and procedures that that show why they operated a certain way, but they also have an opportunity to learn from the community member about how that comes across. So it's a learning experience for both. And in the end, more often than not, that community member is glad that they participated, and that officer is also glad that they participated because they were both able to learn from each other. And that helps to promote community and police trust moving forward.
And it's important to have that dialogue. I do know that when people are initially pulled over or they're in the heat of that moment, I was just recently pulled over by a Santa Monica police officer on the Pacific Coast Highway. I haven't gotten pulled over since I was I think in college, back in Wisconsin. And it was a little unnerving, to be honest with you, because I'm on Pacific Coast Highway. I wasn't even sure where to pull over. But we worked together and I kind of communicated and signaled, went over in front of a convenience store. But it was around speeding, but I was not paying attention. I was on my way to Pepperdine. And I was definitely going faster than 45 miles an hour. And we had a really good interchange. And I said, gosh, I thought about it. I have a Pepperdine, law thing on the back of my Jeep. And, we had a good conversation. I mentioned the Citizens Police Academy idea, but the more important thing was that, he was right. He said, look, we're having issues with the Pacific Coast Highway. People cannot be speeding. And that had a big impact on me because I know what's going on. We lost students, at Pepperdine, 4 of them, and it was horrible last year. And there are a lot of accidents and things on PCH. And it just totally impacted me, like in a good way. I'm just so aware now. I'm keeping it at 45 to 50, not getting distracted like that. Of course, these days, if you're driving out to Pepperdine on PCH, you can barely get above 20 miles an hour because of all the rock slides and stuff. But again, there's a time and place to have that dialogue. And it's in the heat of that moment when you're pulled over and stuff. That's when I pull back and say, look, you're in charge here. This is all about safety for you, for me. There's always a place to have these conversations or dialogues later on, whether it's the court system or mediation or whatever. I want to emphasize for those on the Zoom or on this webinar today, not everybody is a lawyer who's a mediator. Not every lawyer should be a mediator, to be honest with you. I was not good as a litigator. I don't like conflict, but I'm much more the type to bring people together and facilitate things. So I'm in my sweet spot now at this stage and age. The best mediators we have, some of them in Southern California Mediation Association elsewhere, are not lawyers. They have human relations backgrounds. They have other backgrounds. They're coaches, so on and so forth. It's just really important to know that. We have both kinds of folks in our community, and we play off each other and learn from each other. And so I want to just also, we have we do have another person trying to get in. Deputy Sheriff Rosas is online. I guess she's in the chat. She said, but is not able to be seen. I'm not sure, but I do want to get to an array of questions that are also popping up because something I'm interested in with the city of Santa Monica. And by the way, Rhiannon, thank you too for handling the chat today because you're answering a lot of good questions here as well. So another trend line is more and more municipalities are using trained mediators for non-violent calls. This is not hostage negotiation. That's a different ballgame. But we're talking about non-violent calls. I did a ride along as far as my 50-hour training. And in fact, the officer I rode along with it. Now we're doing this on an annual basis. I love it. We're going to ride along once a year so I can just kind of dip in and say, what have you seen that's changed? What's going on in your world? It's kind of a cool way to do this. I asked for that and I'm going to be getting that. So, but more municipalities are now bringing in mediators. I don't know if any of you want to address that, Shalfan or anybody else. Cheryl, I know it's a trend. I'd like to see it happen more and more because I was on calls where frankly, the officer or officers could have left for other things and a mediator could have been on scene to help, whether it's a neighbor dispute or some other thing going on that would have required maybe some, those kinds of skill sets, but wasn't requiring, protection or wasn't a violent kind of thing. Does anybody want to address that trend? Any of you?
Well, before, I mean, I can speak to it briefly, but I do want to say something and then I'll hop to that. I see that Teresa had a quick question. I want to just kind of speak to it because it's on my screen here. She says, she's asking like, what happens if an officer has, let's say like so many complaints over a short period of time? Like, are we just going to keep mediating that or does it get trained? Is there training? And I think Rihanna, you address that in the chat. So that's really vetted out essentially. So like if an officer is continuing to get kind of, flagged for these issues, then that's something that Rhiannon's side would kind of pull out and say, maybe we shouldn't, or even if it got to, we've had these conversations like, hey, I've seen this person show up a couple of times. What do you think? Should we continue down the path of mediation, or is this a different conversation? And then we would have a conversation around what that would look like. So I just wanted to let you know that, and I believe even in our policy setting that program up, there are stipulations that said, I think it's two per year or something like that. I think there's like a cap that, and then there's going to be a conversation around that. Now,
Let me-
Will, to
Shafin, let me interrupt you real quick. Sorry to do that.
Yeah.
John, Commander Tom, thank you for being on. I know you have to jump off at 11:45. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your service to all of us here in Los Angeles, and I'll see you at school.
Thank you. And I really appreciate this opportunity. I put my email in the chat. If anyone has any questions or concerns that they want to bring up, I'm always available and open to talking to anyone. Have a great day.
We thank you so much.
Thank you.
Be safe. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Sorry, Shafin.
no worries. But to your question earlier about having mediators, kind of respond to community complaints. I mean, first of all, I think that should happen more often. And I will say what's interesting is we were proposing to do something like this with the city of Los Angeles, and I did some research of the various programs that were doing this across the country. And there was one that was happening in Oregon that was being touted as being very, very successful. Like, hey, they're doing it here. And then when I called there, when we did deeper research, they were saying actually that of the calls that community members were responding to, like a large percent, like over 90% of them needed to follow it with law enforcement anyway. So it really wasn't, so like it was happening, but it wasn't sticking.
Yep.
So that's an interesting statistic, right? But at the same time, I still hold hope. I still have hope for the idea that community mediators can be impactful. I'll say this: it's also about the timing, right? Because when you wait until like they're calling 911 or calling law enforcement, like maybe you might need a little bit more intervention than just somebody saying, let's have a conversation. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but like usually people are very well invested in their positions, and it's harder to have a kind of a mediated conversation. It's not impossible, but it's just more difficult. Something to note, and that's all.
I noticed also when we did our thing, Rhiannon, we were sitting at the same table out at Pepperdine. Brian, your colleague, the three of us were doing some simulated mediations. Your colleague, Brian, who's in Pacific Palisades, is a mediator, a sworn officer, uniformed officer, who did go out to calls in Pacific Palisades with neighbors that are having issues with trees falling down or whatever. And they actually intervene at that point and help, which is great. I mean, and so he's trained, and I guess in a different role slightly than a regular officer. Is that correct, Rhiannon? Is that available?
Yeah, he was, like I typed in the chat, a senior lead officer. So, and then a lot of us go through that training that, the mediation training through the Strauss Institute at Pepperdine. But that, it's interesting. It's funny because I think about this as now I work recruitment. I think about the skill set that these young people have that we hire. And I'm thinking about it as you're talking, Shafin, and I just want to mention something that we've kind of learned. Our psychologist is talking to us about these young people that we're hiring. With COVID, a lot of people, there's like this generation of people that while they were sheltering, a lot of these young people have never even had a relationship, right? So now they're responding to a domestic violence radio call and separating parties and giving advice, right? So but they've never had a relationship themselves. Their relationships a lot are online, like gaming, or their friendships, or, whatever, because they're used to that, in the COVID, right? They were at home, they were sheltering, and they're used to that kind of environment of just being more at home and not going out and going to college online and not having these experiences. Like there's a generation of young people that we're hiring that that didn't have a lot of jobs, that were in person, face to face, and lack a lot of interpersonal face to face communication skills. And we're seeing this, and I'm sure a lot of people that are on this, depending where you're from and what you do, are seeing this too with the younger generation. And I find it interesting. It's hard enough when you're 21, 22 years old, which is like the minimum requirements to be a police officer, right? To kind of figure out how to be a conflict, resolve conflict and things like that, and the tactics and all the things you have to have in your mind. And then to be like a master, mediator. I see that it could be so valuable to have somebody come in like Cheryl, like Shoffin, like Will, just that cool, calm, collected with this life experience that just sweeps in and can just, evaluate the situation and bring it in. There's no violence, there's no potential for violence, and if there is, there's officer presence. Wow, how amazing would that be?
Yeah.
Right. But when you take a police officer that's 22, 23 years old and you expect them to be all of those things, that's a
Yeah.
big ask.
It's
That's
a
a real
huge-
big ask.
Yeah, it is. It is a big ask. And I think, hopefully those things can be developed and we can talk about doing some of those things over time, now in the role that you're in and, with Pepperdine or other schools or other things. That's a great conversation to have. I want to cover a couple quick things here before we wrap up. Time goes quickly. Again, the Southern California Mediation Association, what we are is a membership organization, mediators, attorneys, non-attorneys, people who just care about conflict resolution and the art of mediation. Okay. And those of you that are on that are not mediators or we're tuning in this week, we hope that you'll consider that. Think about it, because we all have the ability to resolve conflict if we're willing to. And we need more folks like that than on the other side of that, obviously. And it's just a choice. Which energetic frequency would you rather be in? It's just these days it'd be more fun to let go of things and actually experience some peace. This isn't just some do-gooder kind of thing. We actually can shift the energy around. We heard yesterday at school, the Western Justice Center was there. They've got an incredible program of teaching schools at a young age, going all the way down to kindergarten on up, on how to resolve conflict, how to de-escalate things. Can you imagine if everybody were taught those skill sets? We forget sometimes. We're in such a culture, especially around this country, of blaming other people and sitting back and complaining and shifting responsibility. It's not taking personal responsibility. There's just nothing better than being personally responsible and serving others and helping them get aware that they have the power, that they can be empowered to resolve conflict. And that a lot of this is just common sense. People need to sit down and be able to talk. What a concept, to talk to one another in person or by Zoom, but to actually sit and hear another person. And I find, and I think it's especially true, and I'm not trying to plug Pepperdine here, it may sound like I'm not, but they're uniquely positioned and really good at this, about values-based discussions. When you start talking to people about values, suddenly red, blue, Republican, Democrat, those things kind of start to kind of float away, because you realize we're more aligned on certain things than we think. And that's a really good place to start. There are a couple of quick questions here. Is there a similar program in Orange County or other Southern California communities? Peggy Pence, thanks for asking that. Do we know offhand, is there a similar type program down in Orange County? I don't know personally. Anybody?
I personally don't know. Sorry.
Sorry, Peggy. We're a knowledgeable group, but not all knowledgeable.
I've never worked with any law enforcement in Orange County. No.
But thanks for asking, Peggy, and thanks for being on here. Bruce, you asked, are there police officer group meetings where the officers work on their mediation skills after their own field experiences? Yes, example would be the training that's going on at the Strauss Institute, under a grant, to help train officers on de-escalation, other techniques. There are other things too, right? I mean, Shoffin, you're definitely up on all this. I mean,
absolutely. So we train officers all the time. By the way, officers, just so you know, they are some, especially LAPD. I mean, and Rihanna, you can speak to this. They get they're constantly in training, constantly. It's one thing or the other. I know the mediation stuff that we do obviously is kind of central to what we're having this conversation about, but there's a lot of communication training that happens too as well, right? And I want to just highlight, because I just was reading a chat coming in from Marlon. You do not have to be an attorney. So I want to be clear. In fact, when I was at the city attorney's office, we worked with some of our best mediators were non-attorneys. So I want to just name that. You do not have to be an attorney to be a mediator, to do this work, to make a difference and have an impact. Earlier, somebody asked like how to get practice and actually make money doing this work. I will say the practice, I believe, is like Cheryl is a great example of this. She came in as a volunteer mediator, and now she's constly, like booked and getting, and there's others as well. Yeah. So I mean, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit, Cheryl. I know we're coming up on time, but the bottom line is start where you're at and know that there's such a need, you will be pulled into opportunity.
Yeah.
And being a part of a community like SCMA and like Pepperdine, we always are connecting each other into different opportunities as well.
It's a nice, yeah, it's a nice, and here's the bottom line. It's a nice community. It's a good community of people of all different backgrounds, professional backgrounds, but everyone's coming at it from a good mindset. And in a world that we're in today, I tell you, at least for me, it was a real, it was something I needed to do. I got PTSD during COVID. I won't go into all that. It's personal, but my remedy for that was to do what? To get out of my house, to connect with other people, to be part of a community out at Strauss and Crusoe and Pepperdine and SCMA and be part of good energy. And boy, has that shifted things just like that. Not funny how that works. I'd like to end here today because we're going to have to. One is by thanking all of our panelists who've taken time out today with family in town, on duty, and other things going on. I see Rhiannon, you've got people milling about behind you. I assume you're working today as well. Unfortunately, Rosas, Soshi Rosas, who has been, I am going to meet you. I'm determined to meet you. You've been in law enforcement for 40 years, 27 years with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. For some reason, we weren't able to get you in here. I see she says she's here, but we can't hear you. It's just a technology glitch, but we're going to do more of these kinds of things. And Rosas, you're amazing. Actually, we had a great phone conversation. So for anybody who's thinking about being a mediator, stop thinking. There are all kinds of options. For those who haven't experienced mediation, ask. Just say, I'm willing. For those who are mediators, thank you. For all of our police officers and those that are in law enforcement on the front lines, you know, we thank you. There are bad apples everywhere, as they say. There are bad apple attorneys. There are bad apple people from Milwaukee originally, like me. There are all kinds of people out there. I want to take just 2 minutes. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, feel free, but it's lunch hour. I want to take 2 minutes, which I'm going to time, and then we'll drop off here. I want 2 minutes of silence just to experience, and I'm going to time it. It may seem, if it's too corny for one of you or some of you, that's fine. I can't tell, so you can just jump off. But I'm going to start a stopwatch here. We're going to do 2 minutes of complete silence. And then we can go about our day to experience what peace feels and sounds like. Because we're in this constant distraction. And news and this and that and division and blah, 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 blah. This morning I woke up to a thing saying that a Metro bus had been stolen and then run into cars and the Ritz-Carlton Hotel downtown. I'm thinking that was my morning. That's how I started my morning, with an NBC alert on my phone. I thought, you know, crazy. So let's take a moment here at lunch hour to thank everybody on here. I thank all of you for joining us. Thanks to Southern California Mediation Association. Let's experience peace for 2 minutes, and then we'll just cut it off. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everybody. That's what peace feels like and sounds like, as they said at the Academy Awards, to the peacemakers. That's what we all are. Thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody for your time.